granniopteryx, she knows the truth, she's linking every link.
Hello, this fellow here is Humza Yousaf. He was the First Minister of Scotland. Also, he was involved in some, let's put it this way. The UNRWA was, as we all know, heavily infiltrated by Hamas and basically appears to have been an arm of Hamas. At the beginning of the Gaza-Israel war in 2023, some of Humza Yousaf's relatives, or his wife's relatives, were trapped in Gaza. They couldn't get out because the Egyptians wouldn't let them out and that Hamas wouldn't let them out. Now, it just so happened that Scotland wanted to give some money to help the poor people of Gaza. And the Scottish government wanted to give it to UNICEF, the United Nations Relief Fund for Children. But Humza Yousaf changed that to giving the money to the UNRWA, which, as we know, was heavily infiltrated by Hamas to the extent that you could more or less say it was an arm of Hamas. And magically enough, shortly thereafter, some of his relatives got out of Gaza. All right, well, this is Humza Yousaf, and he is schooling us on great inventions of the Muslims. Now, it's sort of interesting what he says here. I won't play the whole thing, but I will play this opening bit.
We invented algebra.
Now, so he starts off as telling us that Muslims invented X, Y, and Z. And then he goes through a list. And I found that rather peculiar because I don't say, for instance, that Christians invented the printing press. I'd say it was invented in Germany. I don't say that Christians invented penicillin, which was, I say that no, Alexander Fleming invented, or rather discovered, penicillin. Do you see what I mean? He is saying Muslims did this when, as we all know, Islam took over many countries in the North Africa and the Levant and further afield. And they were all different cultures. They may have had, at least nominally, the Muslim religion. But it's not that Muslims invented these things. And in fact, let's go through the list. He starts off talking about algebra. And he says that Muslims invented algebra. As a matter of fact, the Babylonians invented algebra. Most of the people in that Levant area knew about algebra. It was formalized by a Persian called Al-Khwarizmi. All right? And he actually turned it into its own discipline. Right, the next thing he spoke about, what do I have on my list here? Yeah, coffee, which was an Ethiopian drink. He said Muslims invented coffee. No, they didn't. The Ethiopians, who were, by the way, mostly Christian, they knew about coffee. They drank coffee regularly. It was then taken up by Yemeni Sufis to keep them awake during long nights of studying. And from there on, it went round the, any part of the world that the Arabs had any influence over, and then finally into Europe. But it wasn't their invention. Now, then he says mental health care. The Muslims invented mental health care. Well, as a matter of fact, mental health care was the definition of mental illnesses as an illness and as sometimes an expression of a physical illness were noted by a Persian we call Avicenna. And he was an Aristotelian philosopher. Now, he was a polymath, a brilliant man, and he pioneered the scientific method in all sorts of things. But he was working in the 10th and beginning of the 11th century. After him came a chap called Al-Ghazali, and Al-Ghazali decided that there was no such thing as a scientific method. He said that Allah could change the laws of physics. His example was, if I set fire to this piece of cotton and God doesn't want fire to happen, then fire won't happen. And after that was taken up by the Muslim world, and this time the Muslim world, and scientific method limped on for a little while and then just disappeared. By the 15th century, everything like that had completely ground to a halt, possibly even by the 14th century. So although Avicenna did come up with the idea of mental health and mental health care, it didn't last because Islam lost its wits. Now, he talks about antibiotics having been invented by Muslims. No, they were almost certainly known by the ancient Egyptians and were used by people in the Middle East for centuries before Islam in the form of mouldy bread. They obviously discovered that if you put mouldy bread on a cut, it stopped it from going bad. And indeed, in folk medicine here in Britain, a bread poultice was known about by local healers. It was a formalised type of medicine only when Alexander Fleming came up with the discovery in the early 20th century. Right, what else do I have? Optics. Ibn al-Haytham came up with, he did a lot of studies into optics. And guess what? He was Persian again. All right? Clocks. There were clocks known about before the Muslims made their appearance on the world stage. It is true that a fellow called Al-Jazari came up with the idea of gears for clocks, although he was still working on water clocks and candle clocks. Mechanical clocks were a long way down the line in Europe. Al-Jazari, he was Kurdish or Persian? Right, so what we've got here, I made a list. There's Al-Jazari, either Kurdish or Persian. Ibn al-Haytham, he was Persian. Avicenna, he was Persian. Al-Khwarizmi, remember the algebra man? He was Persian. So when Humza Yousaf says this...
We made maths hard. We made
Persian.
Mornings bearable.
Christian Ethiopian.
Time inescapable.
Persian.
And surgeries survivable.
Persian.
You're welcome.
I'm sure the Persians appreciate his thanks. And by the 14th century, most scientific inquiry and development had completely ground to a halt because of Muslim orthodoxy. I do wonder what sort of an inferiority complex anyone would have to have that makes them make up all that sort of stuff all the time, because, of course, Humza Yousaf isn't the only one. How inferior do you have to feel to make up a history in that way? It's just beyond me. Okay, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.